Great. Thanks, Kathy, for this introduction. It's my pleasure today to present to you about GSBN, and the title presentation is "Can Blockchain Transform the Shipping Industry?" I guess that's sort of echo to the last question I heard before when I was on the backstage. The answer from the last presenter about how blockchain can be used for in mass-out products, and my talk will be touched upon that. The agenda that I'd like to follow is quickly touch on a short history of blockchain. I'm sure you guys know, but just maybe an overview of how it came to be, what are different applications, and why specifically it hasn't seen as much adoption in enterprise. Then secondly is why does GSBN, so Global Shipping Business Network, decide to use blockchain? And then I conclude that by 2 examples of product that we're working on right now that's really empowered by blockchain and the network and what we're trying to do here. And obviously, I think at the end of the presentation, there's maybe 5-10 minutes left for questions that you may raise throughout the presentation through Kathy to the virtual platform and to the in-person event. So first, let's start with a short history of blockchain. So blockchain really started with a white paper published at the height of the subprime mortgage crisis in US in 2008 by this anonymous person called Satoshi Nakamoto. And that's really a purpose to try to get rid of the dependency that you have the traditional finance. And over the last, let's say, 10, 11 years, what you've seen is massive speculative bubbles. Talk about new internet. And really 3 examples I think you're seeing right now is cryptocurrency with many, I would say, pump and dump and scheme that you have, Bitcoin, Ethereum, BSC, bunch of things. Right now, the market, I think, is kind of cratering with the rate hike threat, but it has been a wild market with many waves up and down. You also see a lot of talk about non-fungible token, NFTs, and metaverse, which I think is really heightened under the COVID-19, where everything is doing remote, including for me participating to this conference. And then also what they call decentralized autonomous organization, DAOs. So one example here is when they use that to try to buy the Constitution DAO that happened, I think, a month ago. And effectively, what you see is there's a lot of projects that started off from this initial white paper that gained a lot of attraction and captured the imagination of, I would say, the retail investors, right, the retail consumer. But we've seen, speaking, less adoption. And if you look at the Gartner hype cycle for blockchain 2021, blockchain platform, blockchain, we're kind of here, right? So, and it's not really as well accepted. And a lot of the use case people say about blockchain, among them, you had traceability, you had improving finance, hasn't actually seen as much adoption as, let's say, Bitcoin or Ethereum. And there's a reason for that. So the reason, based on our study and our discussion with different stakeholders, is there are 3 what we call necessary conditions for success if you use a blockchain consortium, a consortium based on blockchain. So the first condition that's really necessary is you indeed need blockchain. A lot of use cases before actually didn't really need blockchain as a technology, right? So if you really first figure out, do you really need blockchain or not? And I'm sure you've seen those decision tree where you have every single decision is like, no, you don't need blockchain, no, you don't need blockchain, and very few use cases actually indeed use blockchain. The second condition you need to have is you need to have the right incentive for. So blockchain typically is used in a certain project where you have coordination between people and they have different incentives. If you don't align the incentive of the people to use this technology, it actually typically won't take off. And one thing you can think from the point of view of Bitcoin, Ethereum, why the incentives align is if you buy the stock, the coin goes up. So everybody has the same incentive. Everybody wants a coin to go up. So you have incentive, people want to participate. But how do you do that in consortium that's more industry-based? And the last point is typically blockchain prepared to solve some problem where you need some adoption, right? People need to say, I want to use this technology. And as all of us know, in many industry, digitalization and change is not something that people want to do. So what's required also for those projects to be successful, in my opinion, is you need some form of policy support. So the government needs to be supportive on technology, provide you some regulatory clarity on if you can use that or not. and more than that, maybe even starting project to say we want to support using blockchain. And if you don't have, that's also quite difficult because there's so many reasons to not to use blockchain, not to transform, right? So now let's talk about why GSBN use blockchain. So before we talk about GSBN use blockchain, let me explain a bit what is GSBN and what we're trying to do. So GSBN stands for Global Shipping Business Network, and our mission is to accelerate digital transformation of the shipping industry. Our founding member of GSBN, or we call it shareholders as well, are Costco Shipping Line, Hapag-Lloyd, and OOCL on the shipping line side. And the terminals, Hutchison Ports, PSA, Costco Shipping Ports, Qingdao Port, SIPG. So we have 8 fairly sizable players in the shipping industry who are our shareholders. And we underwent many years of collaboration and working together to figure out what's the right governance structure, right model to set up GSBN. And it took us, I think we started in 2017, 2018. It took us almost 3 years to set it up. We incorporated in Hong Kong in March last year. So let's talk about the condition I mentioned before, right? To say you need those necessary consortium to be successful. Let's look at it if they apply to GSBN or not. So first, do you really need blockchain or not? So that's actually quite easy answer because most people believe that shipping industry or global logistic is a good use case for blockchain. So shipping industry needs a trusted data exchange platform because we can talk about digitization, transformation of the industry. Fundamentally, you are required to use data. And data, if used just by yourself, is not super useful. You have to exchange with other people. So having something you can trust to exchange data is very important. Now, the second comment is also important because this industry is very fragmented, right? Everybody is a competitor with each other. So if you share your data to a platform and you have to trust the platform to act on the best interest of the ecosystem, it's very hard to trust. So blockchain in this instance is perfect because that gives you a trustless way to share data where you don't have legal language or the benevolence of the platform operator. So that's actually very important. That's the reason I think blockchain is a really good use case for the shipping industry. Now, let's talk about the second point with the right incentive for participants. So from the GSBN design, one thing that we landed on, I think is really important. I want to spend some time to make sure that it hits some of you understand what we're thinking about this is you need to have a not-for-profit model, and GSBN set up as a not-for-profit. And the reason for that is if you think from the point of view of digitization, a lot of other data platforms that you know of are actually exploitative. Google, such as Facebook, such as AWS, Amazon, they're all building a data moat where they collect data from an entire industry, and they're here to mine it to make money from the data. And that's sometimes good for the customer, but really bad for the industry. It creates what we call monopoly and behavior that's actually really bad for the industry as a whole. So the risk when you build a data platform, the end up with the same situation. We just collect data from everyone to different means of coercion or collaboration, commercial coercion, and that platform then has too much power. So that's why we design as not-for-profit in the sense that there is never a commercial incentive for us to take. And the way we think about ourselves is much more building as a data utility, what we call data utility, which is you're here to distribute water, electricity, gas, and data is just something that everybody needs to operate and to perform the job. And you set up as utility effectively. The second point is when you set up as utility and you need to convince people to join in to collaborate, they need to create some value, right? Everybody who joins needs to get something out of joining GSBN. And that's also something that we outline ahead of time. There needs to be a value proposition for everyone to join. And that goes back to the incentive for participants. So these 2 points, I think, are quite important, but they're not sufficient. The last point, I think, is something that typically people don't immediately jump to that, but I think it's actually really important also, which is a policy support for digitization and maybe using blockchain or other technology. So right now, 2 examples, right? We set up in Hong Kong. We look at the large jurisdiction in this region. So China, in the 14th five-year plan, is a big proponent of blockchain technology, right? And digitalization of supply chain is, again, another very important theme in China. So through that, actually, we have a lot of support that in other jurisdictions you may not have. People may be more skeptical of blockchain, at least don't want to try it. But that's not the case in this region. The second location where you guys all are, which is Singapore. The Singapore government also is very, very supportive of digitization and using blockchain, IoT, or other technology, right? And the policy, I think, is a smart nation, smart everything, I guess, Singapore. And I think that's also very, very important because it's not about dollar amount invested, but having the right framework, have the legal regimen, so you have clarity in what can happen, what cannot happen, and also have sometimes the support from different ministry for you to adopt this technology. That's really, really important. And that's, I think, we see one of differentiator in this region to adopt blockchain, hopefully make the jump towards digitization. Now, if I try to summarize the strategy in 3 clear pillars, and to reiterate from GSBN perspective, on the left is what I explained already, that we try to build a trade data utility platform. We're not for profit, we're independent, meaning we're not linked to the shipping line or the terminal. We are completely independent, we think, for the entire ecosystem. And we're driven by the interest of the entire ecosystem. So from point of view of shipping line, terminal, banks, BCOs, any type of actor in this ecosystem. From the blockchain perspective, the first thing is it's a trusted permission blockchain. GSBN also do not have access to the data. All data put on GSBN are encrypted, and therefore blockchain is required to make sure that nothing is tampered. You can trace the provenance of the data. And lastly, also because our shareholders did not have any technology company, we agnostic. And that's very, very important because in this day and age, when you share data, it has to be global. And in different jurisdictions, you have to partner with different people. So for us with GSBN in China, we partner with the Ali Cloud and Chen on the cloud hosting and then the blockchain services. Outside China, we're working with Azure, we're working with Oracle, and we can afford to partner with the right technology provider for our customer. And they have the choices effectively. They're not locked in one person. And lastly, on the right is probably the use cases and how value have been created, right? So GSBN is not for profit, but value has been created for people to use GSBN. And then the way we think about it when we create value of the product is we offer a bunch of API, standardized API, that can be used to achieve different goals, different value for in the ecosystem of the shipping industry. And you can use our API to facilitate trusted collaboration. When data is being exchanged, is logged, you know exactly, you can prove the data is true and unique. And there's a lot of interesting things you can do with those. Also, from the point of view of value creation, there are 2 types of people who create value from GSBN. One are the data contributor. They get rewarded for sharing data on GSBN. And the second are people who are solving real problems using those APIs. They can build application and they can charge customer for this application. They just have to, in return, compensate for the data contributors. So I think it's it's a very virtuous circle. There's a flywheel of value being created by exchanging data and building application. Now, let's talk specifically to the product that we're building. So the first product I want to talk about is basically respond to a issue that everybody's seeing, everybody's aware right now, right? For the last 12 months, I think the shipping industry is becoming the zeitgeist of a COVID-19 era, where everybody knows about disruption in container shipping. That's why I think it was the best of times for different people. The container shipping industry is making a lot of money in comparison to the last decade, the last 2 or 3 decades. At the same time, you start to see log jam and weight of ship at LA, at Long Beach, and different location, and that just signal that the market is not really doing well, right? You cannot really cope with the increase in demand and disruption brought up by the virus. So when we look at that, is there any product we can try to build to help address this issue of disruption at the terminal? And that's why the first product we launched in July last year is what we call Cargo Release, right? And Cargo Release first as a product was launched in China to basically address the very simple thing, which is how do you release container when the ships arrive at the port of arrival, at the destination, right? How do you release the container? And actually, you'll be surprised, but the process is very, very complicated and error-prone and involve a lot of physical exchange. So what you have before is many physical interaction with different people. You have carrier ship agent, consignee, trucker. A lot of people getting involved in this process, and that's before. On the right-hand side, what you have is all the exchanges happening directly on GSBN. You send only the one location, all the information. The information that's being shared, document being shared, are logged on blockchain, so you can the veracity of the document, and you can guarantee security of the data being exchanged. And every single stakeholder can actually see the information and know if there's an issue, where the issue is happening. And because of that process doing that, we receive many benefits. So I think there's 8 benefits here. I won't go through all of them. Let me highlight. In the COVID-19, paperless, contactless is probably the most important one, right? Paperless is very good for the environment, don't have to print those paper. Contactless, you don't have to touch anything, have a risk of contracting the virus. It saves the cost, both for time and also for a year. The single truth, and maybe let me jump on some of them. I think one of the things that people sometimes misunderstood is there is cargo release, sometimes digital cargo release in the past, but this one is secure. You have guarantee that document exchange is real and is logged somewhere, is coming directly from the ERP system of the shipping line. And that's a big difference, right, compared to any other type of EDI communication that you have in the past. Now, what have we learned as we roll out this product across China terminal and different partner and then the customer that we're seeing? So first off, cargo release is actually really perfect for blockchain, right? And the reason it's perfect is fundamentally it's a coordination problem with various parties. In the current situation where arrival time on terminal are delayed, terminal cannot turn quickly enough to increase throughput, you really need this. The second thing, obviously, COVID-19, especially in China, where the control COVID-0 policy is very important. This is basically a no-brainer. They really promote to have no-touch, paperless process for that. From the market, the feedback from the market, right? So that's typically where most of product you launch will either make it or fail it. The customers love cargo release, right? This is the highest NPS product for the shipping line has deployed in China, and that's feedback after feedback from the customer. From a terminal perspective, right? Even though they're the direct beneficiary of it, they also actually are seeing some benefit because they have a faster turnaround time. And potentially can accommodate higher throughput. Obviously, the reason you have disruption terminal is not just because the release process is slow, it's also equipment issue, but at least from the point of view of the process, a lot. And now in terms of rollout, so already with some of our shipping line founding members, it has been rolled out across China. Now we are in the process of rolling out in Asia. So in Singapore, in Lam Chabang, in Thailand, in other locations as well, seeing and planning for rollout in Europe and starting in Rotterdam. So that's I would say a first product, pretty popular, very well received in the market, and launched very swiftly, if you will, after incorporation. What's next for GSBN? So we have one product, which is cargo release, which I think will go from strength to strength, try to adapt to different location. What are next we're looking at? So back in September last year, GSBN has signed an MOU to form this trade finance advisory group with 3 major banks, namely Bank of China, DBS, and HSBC. And what is the idea behind it? The idea behind it is very simple. So when you look at the shareholder structure of GSBN, they are a major actor in the shipping industry, shipping line terminal. But one realization is the issue that we see in shipping is not limited to shipping, is also prevalent in trade finance, which is, if you will, the dual market to the shipping industry. So you have the physical supply chain and you have the financial supply chain on the other side. And these two data silos, these two processes don't typically talk to each other. However, if you will, since the financial crisis back in 2008, trade finance as an industry are trying to digitize, try to improve And they've been many projects they're doing. I believe there's a presentation later on from Contour. Sorry, on the panel there's the CPO from Contour who will be sharing his view. But trade finance using blockchain is something that also picking a pace and becoming more and more important for the banks. And it's very natural for us to think, if we want to solve the problem of the end customer, which is the shipper, right? They don't care if it's the physical supply chain or the financial supply chain. They have a single problem, which is they want to make goods and sell goods to the end buyer. And how can we facilitate their commerce, which is supply chain and the finance component? And therefore, we are setting up this advisory group to really figure out how to connect the two. And very happy to share that we made good progress on that. And we're in the process of running POCs as we speak right now with those banks. And we're looking to launch some APIs in 2022, which leverage the data that the shipping line, the terminal, and different various players in the supply chain can provide to power and to help trade finance. And what we're hoping to do is we have this virtuous cycle where we can provide data to trade finance to improve their process. But not only that, the financial supply chain can be tagged on to the service that's offered by the shipping industry by linking the two. What I mean by that, maybe in a less conceptual term, but in a more application term, is there's a lot of event that happens when you move goods, right? If those events can be also linked to financial product, that's really where we reach kind of the frontier, the interesting aspect of digitalization, and that's really what we're going for here. So again, very interesting. We're gonna launch that this year. And with that, I think that's my last slide. So now I think, how am I doing on time? I think on time I'm good.
Great. Hi, Bertrand. I'm back in the room. So thank you very much for that. And really interesting to hear a bit more, and that you do have a few questions. I hope you can hang around for a couple more minutes. I'm just loading them up. So first one, and I think this is probably a long question, really, but I'll put it to you anyway. How would you compare or contrast GSBN and TradeLens, which also uses blockchain to exchange supply chain data? Is there a need for both, or do you expect one to eventually become standard, somewhat like VHS and Betamax?
Sure. Thank you for your question. I think you actually picked the example in technology where you had one winner, but in most technology it's very rare that you have one single winner. You typically have many platforms. So if you take an example of a phone, right, smartphone, you have iOS system, Android, right? Most technology, you will have more than one player because fundamentally, those platforms try to solve different issues, different way to go about the problem. And as I think the presenter earlier said, and hopefully you understand from this also, blockchain is just a technology. It's not really what GSBN is only about. It's not just GSBN just do blockchain, right? It's really about what problem you're trying to solve and how do you go about it. And for that reason, I think TradeLens and GSBN, although both leverage blockchain technology, have very different vision and way to go about it. And there's no one-way solution, one right and one wrong solution. I think just different approach to go for the same goal, which is digitize the industry. And it'd be very pretentious for me to say GSBN is the right one, TradeLens is the wrong one, or TradeLens is the right one, GSBN is the wrong one. Obviously, I won't say that, but it's very hard at this day to make that statement because I think all strategy have some merit and have some weaknesses. So if you really have to contrast between TradeLens and GSBN, I think TradeLens has been really successful at building, I would say, an ecosystem with many shipping line, a lot of terminal, customs, whichever you want to call it, right? So build this really coalition. I think the aspect where TradeLens has been struggling a bit more is what is the value created for everyone involved, right? The shipping line has a strong value, but what is the value for the terminal? What is the value from other people? And that's something I think when you build a network like this, that is sort of the risk when you grow the network very quickly to have this very strong network. What is the value for everyone? And if you don't solve, you may come into a challenge. From GSBN perspective, hopefully you understand the strategy, how we think about it. Our view is really you need to really try to think very carefully the value proposition and how to bring everyone to the table, where you cannot rely on the fact that the shipping line is the most important one, and then if all the shipping, because it doesn't matter how powerful the shipping lines are, you need to transform the entire industry, and you have to be more collaborative approach. And I think that's, again, maybe this is a characterization. I don't know if it's anyone from trainers in the room, maybe you disagree, but that's at least my perception, personal perception. Now, maybe a second point to answer this question, which is, as you said, platform. My personal belief is it won't. For a very simple reason is I think you're solving different problem. You're trying to different problem. If you look at the product roadmap, actually I don't have the product roadmap trainers, but the product they've been working on in the market, fundamentally they're quite different than GSBN, right? Because there's a different approach on how to do this. I think from GSBN perspective, is really solving the coordination problem, not as much as just putting every data on GSBN and try to build some data product, but more about how to solve the process, which is cargo release, right? Which to some degree could be perceived as harder or simpler if you restrict the area of focus. And the way I think in the future will play out most likely is as a shipper, as an ultimate client, you don't care about GSBN or trade lanes, right? You just want the job to be done. And the underlying infrastructure business doesn't really matter to you, right? You're not going to say, oh, I don't do this business because on GSBN, I don't do business because on trade lanes. You don't care. What you want is, do you solve my problem or not? And more likely than not, I think there will be partnership between platforms where there's a customer who are, let's say, on Maersk, shipping on Maersk, and they're on trade lanes, and somehow at some point they're interacting with a score on GSBN, and there is this interoperability that needs to happen. I think that's a more likely outcome in the future for this kind of growth.
Okay, interesting. Thank you. Interest of time, I'll give you one more question if that's okay.
Sure.
This is really, again, another larger topic as well. I suppose really about privacy. So the question that's coming through the virtual platform specifically asks, if the Chinese government asked to be provided with data about users of the GSBN platform, could your users be sure that their data would not be handed over without their consent or knowledge?
No, thank you. That's a very good question, and I think that question is a broader question. It's not just China; it's if any government in the world, right? Because more and more, I think that's a realization that most people start to come to is that data is power, right? I think in the case of Chinese government, is probably the only one to really articulate that, say that data is national security. I think a lot of organizations and country more and more realize data is actually can be used offensively or defensively for your national security from geopolitical angle, especially in the shipping industry, right? What you're shipping is very, very critical. And I don't think the question is what as a privacy, as a personal data. I don't think even the personal data is also from the business point of view, right? It's actually technically on GSBN, there's no like your email address, there's no cookie information, what you cloak. It's more what's shipped, what's the content, the cargo, and this kind of information, right? And from my perspective, is actually that's actually a very, very strong suite of GSBN, right? GSBN is built so that we can guarantee that even if there's any government or European or US government or Chinese government say, I want to get the data, they won't be able to get it from GSBN because we don't have the description key to actually decrypt the data. Whatever you put data on the platform is encrypted, and we don't have. So who wants to get the data, all they will get is encrypted data. Now, I'm sure there's some smart folks in the room can say, oh, what about quantum computing? You can break any encryption. My answer to that will be, if you have really truly quantum computing, I think your target would not be to go and break GSBN data. I think there's a lot of other ways for you to make money to apply your technology. But even if you go that route, the way I think about it is naturally the encryption technique that you're going to use will evolve over time. But from a principal perspective, right, for us to be able to gain the trust of all the stakeholders in global trade, this encryption is very important. So that guarantee to our user or members that we cannot see their data. If we cannot do that, you wouldn't have a company like Hapag-Lloyd from European, from a German company, right? Trust us with their data. There's just no way they would do it, right? And no matter of coercion, I think they will do that because this is, I think, more and more the table stakes for this kind of data sharing. You cannot trust a platform government say, I want to see the data, and we won't be able to disclose because we don't have the keys.